When 3 board members told the Black Waitress she was disrupting a $50,000 charity gala, they never expected 12 guests to silently rise from their seats and transform the evening without saying a single word. Serena Baptiste hadn't expected anyone to recognize her when she walked into the Beacon Hill Club, still carrying the dance shoes that held the memory of everything she'd lost to serve tables like these. The silence that overtook the grand ballroom of the Beacon Hill Club was so dense it seemed to have weight of its own. Conversations ceased, champagne flutes froze mid-air, and hundreds of gazes fixed on the center of the space between tables, adorned with baccarat crystals. Marcus Blackwood, 9 years old, trembled visibly. His legs, trapped in discreet but evident orthopedic braces, wavered as he extended his hand toward Serena Baptiste, the only Black Waitress in Boston's most exclusive establishment. The string quartet had just begun a soft Vivaldi melody, and the boy's impulse to invite someone to dance arose without warning. "Mr. Blackwood, control your son." Pemberton's cutting voice, the French maitre d', sliced through the silence like a blade. "This is inappropriate. This is not a community dance hall, and our staff are not here to entertain children with special needs." William Blackwood, real estate magnate and third-generation founding member of the club, swallowed hard. It was the first time he'd brought Marcus to a social event since the car accident that had left the boy with limited leg mobility 2 years earlier, a mistake he didn't intend to repeat. "Marcus, sit down," he ordered in a low but firm voice, his eyes avoiding both his son and Serena's gaze. "Now." Serena remained motionless, her gaze alternating between the haughty maitre d', the embarrassed multimillionaire, and the boy whose hand was still extended in the air. In her 5 years working there, she had learned to become invisible, especially to clients like Blackwood. "Mr. Pemberton, my shift has ended." Her voice sounded calm as she untied her black apron and placed it on her silver serving tray. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled at Marcus and took his hand. "I can't dance with my apron on." William stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "What do you think you're doing?" Serena looked directly at him, her brown eyes steady and unflinching. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir." Before anyone could intervene, Marcus took a hesitant step forward. His foot dragged painfully across the polished floor, and the metal of his braces creaked softly. But Serena didn't try to guide him or rush him. She simply adjusted her own rhythm to match his. "She'll be fired tomorrow," whispered a woman at the nearby table, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. William watched, paralyzed. A sudden memory struck him like lightning. Elizabeth, his late wife, dancing with baby Marcus in their living room. "It's not about perfection," she used to say. "It's about connection." As Serena followed Marcus's awkward but determined steps, something in the boy's expression changed. Fear gave way to intense concentration. Shame transformed into shy pride. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't being guided, helped, or corrected. He was leading. "Mr. Blackwood." Pemberton's voice interrupted his thoughts, sharp with authority. "I guarantee this will not happen again. She will be properly disciplined." William didn't respond. The entire ballroom seemed to wait for his reaction. After all, a man of his power could end anyone's career with a single word. Staff members stopped what they were doing. Other guests watched with morbid curiosity. Marcus's smile, however, was the only sound echoing in his mind, silent but deafening in its pure joy. Serena led the boy back to his table after 3 gentle dance steps, each one deliberate and dignified. "Thank you for inviting me," she said formally, as if speaking to an adult. "It's been an honor." When she turned to leave, William stopped her. "Wait." His voice sounded different, almost unrecognizable to himself. "What's your name?" "Serena Baptiste, sir." William nodded slowly, repeating the name as if memorizing it. Then he pulled a business card from his jacket and extended it toward her. "My office, tomorrow at 10. The entire ballroom held its breath. Serena accepted the card without showing emotion, but her hand trembled slightly. "Dad," Marcus called when she walked away. "Why did you do that?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. William looked at his son, and for a brief instant saw not just the child Elizabeth had left in his care, but a complete human being whose desires and needs he had systematically ignored for 2 years. What the elegant guests of Beacon Hill Club didn't know, what they couldn't see beyond the black uniform and practiced invisibility, was that Serena Baptiste carried more than serving trays through these marble halls. In her worn canvas bag, tucked beneath spare aprons and tip money, lay a worn leather portfolio containing 5 years of documentation that would have shocked every person in that room. Serena had learned to navigate the intricate social geography of Boston's elite, not through birth or marriage, but through observation and necessity. She knew which board members preferred their whiskey neat, which wives gossiped about affairs, and which children, like Marcus, carried pain that money couldn't heal. Her apartment in Roxbury was a 30-minute subway ride from Beacon Hill's pristine streets, a journey that felt like traveling between different worlds. The contrast wasn't lost on her. From serving champagne that cost more than her monthly rent, to returning home to a studio where every dollar mattered. But what kept Serena moving between these worlds wasn't just financial necessity. Hidden in her bedroom closet, wrapped in tissue paper like precious artifacts, were her old point shoes, relics of a life that had ended abruptly when her mother's medical bills became more important than her dreams. The Beacon Hill Club had become her unlikely laboratory for a different kind of research. For 5 years, she had watched wealthy families navigate relationships with the same fundamental struggles as everyone else, just cushioned by privilege. She had seen children like Marcus, brilliant, sensitive souls trapped not by their physical limitations, but by their parents' fear and social expectations. 3 nights a week, after her shifts ended, Serena transformed from invisible waitress to something entirely different. In a converted warehouse in South Boston, she ran Dance Beyond, a program she had created for children with physical disabilities. Using techniques she had developed through years of observation and instinct, she helped kids find their own rhythm, their own way of moving through the world with dignity. The irony wasn't lost on her. By day, she served people who would never see her as equal. By night, she gave children the gift that Marcus had just discovered, the power to lead, even when the world expected them to follow. Tomorrow's meeting with William Blackwood would either end her financial stability or open a door she'd been pushing against for years. As dinner resumed, the incident rippled through the ballroom like stones dropped in still water. Conversations restarted, but the undercurrent of what had just occurred colored every interaction. "I told you bringing special needs children to formal events was a mistake," Margaret Thornfield whispered to her table-mate, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard by nearby guests. "Some people simply don't understand appropriate boundaries." At the head table, board member Charles Wellington leaned toward William with practiced discretion. "Blackwood, I understand the boy has had challenges, but perhaps next time a private event would be more suitable for his condition." William's jaw tightened. The word condition hung in the air like an accusation, reducing his son to a problem to be managed rather than a child to be celebrated. He had spent 2 years trying to navigate the fine line between protecting Marcus and hiding him from potential judgment. Across the room, Pemberton circulated among the staff with military precision, his earlier embarrassment transformed into righteous authority. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," he announced in the service corridor. "Personal feelings have no place in professional service. We maintain the standards this establishment has upheld for over a century." The other servers exchanged glances but remained silent. They had all witnessed Serena's grace under pressure, and many secretly admired her courage. But job security trumped solidarity in a place where positions were scarce and references essential. Marcus, meanwhile, sat unusually quiet at his father's side, occasionally glancing toward the service entrance where Serena had disappeared. His 9-year-old mind struggled to understand why something that felt so natural, inviting someone to dance, had created such a storm of adult emotions. "Why was everyone upset?" he finally asked his father during the main course. William paused, his fork hovering over medallions of beef that suddenly held no appeal. "How do you explain centuries of unspoken social codes to a child? How do you justify a system you've benefited from but never questioned?" "People have expectations about how things should be done," he said carefully. "But Serena was nice to me. She made me feel normal." The word normal hit William like a physical blow. In his efforts to protect Marcus from a world that might judge his differences, had he instead created a prison of limitations? In the staff quarters, Serena changed from her service uniform into street clothes, her movements automatic after years of practice. Her colleague Maria, a Latina woman who had worked at the club for over a decade, approached with concern. "Serena, that was either very brave or very stupid," Maria said, helping to fold the starched white shirt that was part of their required uniform. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Serena replied, checking her reflection in the small mirror above the lockers. "Pemberton is furious. He's already talking about your insubordination to Mr. Richardson." Richardson was the club's general manager, a man who balanced member satisfaction with operational efficiency, like a watchmaker balancing springs. Serena had expected this. In her 5 years at the club, she had learned that kindness toward members' children was welcomed only within carefully defined boundaries. Tonight, she had stepped outside those boundaries, and there would be consequences. But as she gathered her belongings, including the business card William had given her, Serena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sensation of standing at a crossroads where one path led to safety and the other to possibility. "Maybe it's time for something different," she said to Maria, her voice carrying a quiet determination that made her friend look up sharply. Outside, autumn rain began to fall on Beacon Hill's cobblestone streets, washing the evening clean. The following morning arrived grey and cold, matching the institutional atmosphere of Richardson's office in the club's administrative wing. Serena sat across from the general manager's desk, her posture straight despite the circumstances that had led to this moment. Richardson, a thin man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, reviewed a file that seemed disproportionately thick for a conversation about one evening's events. "Miss Baptiste, in my 23 years managing this establishment, I've rarely encountered such a flagrant disregard for protocol." Serena remained silent, knowing that anything she said would likely be used to justify a decision that had probably already been made. "Mr. Pemberton has filed a formal complaint about your behavior last evening," Richardson continued, adjusting his glasses. "Inappropriate fraternization with a member's child, abandonment of assigned duties, and," he paused for effect, "creating a public disturbance during our most important fundraising event of the year." "I completed my assigned duties," Serena said quietly. "My shift had officially ended when I accepted Marcus's invitation to dance." Richardson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ah, yes, the dance." He said the word as if it tasted unpleasant. "Miss Baptiste, surely you understand that our staff maintains certain boundaries with our membership. These boundaries exist for everyone's benefit, yours included." Through the office window, Serena could see the main dining room where she had served breakfast to some of the same people who had witnessed last night's events. Their lives continued unchanged, while hers hung in the balance of this conversation. "What Mr. Pemberton failed to mention," Richardson continued, "is that several members have called this morning, some expressing concern about the appropriateness of the incident." Serena felt the familiar weight of being reduced to an incident, something to be managed, minimized, and ultimately erased from the club's pristine reputation. "However," Richardson said, and the word carried unexpected weight, "an equal number called to express different sentiments entirely." For the first time since entering the office, Serena felt a flicker of surprise. "Sir?" "Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, for instance." Richardson pulled a pink message slip from the file. "She called to say, and I quote, 'That young woman showed more grace and dignity in 5 minutes than I've seen in 50 years of attending this club.'" Serena blinked, trying to place the name with a face from the previous evening's crowd. "And Dr. James Crawford, you remember, the pediatric neurologist who founded the Children's Recovery Institute, he called to ask specifically about you. Seems he was quite impressed with how you interacted with young Blackwood." The room felt smaller suddenly, the implications of these calls shifting the entire dynamic of the conversation. "Which leaves me," Richardson said, leaning back in his chair, "in an unusual position. Half our membership wants you commended, and the other half wants you terminated." Serena waited, understanding that her next words might determine not just her employment, but the trajectory of everything she had been working toward. "Mr. Richardson," she said carefully, "I've worked here for 5 years without a single complaint. I've never been late, never missed a shift, and I've always maintained the highest standards of service. What happened last night wasn't a departure from those standards. It was an expression of them." Richardson studied her for a long moment. "Explain." "True service means seeing people as human beings first. Marcus didn't see a waitress when he invited me to dance. He saw someone who might understand what it feels like to be different. Honoring that, respecting his dignity and his courage. That's the highest form of service I can provide. The silence that followed felt different from the calculated pauses Serena had grown accustomed to in conversations with authority figures. This felt like consideration rather than manipulation. "Miss Baptiste," Richardson said finally, "you have an appointment with Mr. Blackwood at 10 o'clock. I suggest you keep it. What happens after that conversation will determine your future here." As Serena left the office, she realized she was walking toward the most important meeting of her life. The elevator to the 32nd floor of Blackwood Tower moved with whisper-quiet efficiency, but Serena's heart hammered loud enough to drown out the subtle mechanical sounds. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the elevator shaft, Boston spread out below like a map of her entire life, from the gleaming financial district where she now ascended to the distant neighborhoods where she had grown up and still lived. The receptionist, a perfectly groomed woman in her 40s, examined Serena with the same clinical assessment she had received countless times at the club. "Serena Baptiste to see Mr. Blackwood," she announced, her voice carrying just enough surprise to suggest that people like Serena didn't typically have appointments in this tower. 32nd floor. Miss Chen will escort you." Miss Chen, William's executive assistant, was a woman of indeterminate age with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. As they walked through hallways lined with original artwork that cost more than most people's homes, she spoke with surprising directness. "Mr. Blackwood has been different since last night," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "In 20 years of working for him, I've never seen him cancel a morning full of meetings for a 10 o'clock appointment with someone not on our usual client list." Serena absorbed this information without responding, but it confirmed what she had sensed during those brief moments of interaction at the club. Something significant had shifted in William Blackwood's carefully ordered world. "May I ask," Miss Chen continued as they approached a set of imposing double doors, "what exactly happened at that event? The calls have been interesting." Before Serena could respond, one of the doors opened, revealing William Blackwood himself rather than an assistant. He looked different from the composed multimillionaire she had served champagne to dozens of times. His usually perfect hair showed signs of nervous running through, and his expensive suit couldn't disguise the fatigue around his eyes. "Miss Baptiste," he said, stepping aside to allow her entry. "Thank you for coming." The office occupied half the floor, with windows offering a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. But what caught Serena's attention wasn't the luxury, it was the photos. Multiple framed pictures of Marcus at different ages, and in several of them, a beautiful blonde woman who was clearly no longer part of their lives. William noticed her gaze. "My wife, Elizabeth," he said simply. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer." The information hit Serena with unexpected force. Suddenly, the dynamics of the previous evening took on different layers of meaning. A widowed father trying to navigate the world alone, with a son who had already faced more challenges than most adults. "I researched you," William said, gesturing for her to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "After last night, I needed to understand who had just taught me something about my own son." He opened a folder on his desk, revealing printouts of articles and photographs. "Dance Beyond, you founded it 4 years ago. A program for children with mobility challenges, using adaptive dance therapy to build confidence and motor skills." Serena's breath caught. Her carefully maintained professional invisibility was dissolving in real time. "The Boston Globe featured your program last year," William continued, holding up a newspaper clipping. Quote, "Baptiste's innovative approach helps children discover their own rhythm, empowering them to lead rather than simply follow adaptive movement patterns." He looked up at her, and for the first time since she had known him as a club member, Serena saw not the intimidating businessman, but a father desperate for answers he didn't know how to find. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't you tell me who you were?" Serena met William's gaze steadily, her hands folded in her lap with the same composure she had maintained through years of serving people who never truly saw her. "Mr. Blackwood," she said carefully, "would you have listened if I had introduced myself as the founder of Dance Beyond while serving your champagne?" The question hung in the air between them, and William's uncomfortable silence provided the answer they both already knew. "I sent 3 proposals to the Blackwood Foundation over the past 2 years, Serena continued, her voice remaining level despite the emotion beneath it. Each one was returned with a form letter stating that your foundation focuses on traditional rehabilitation methods with proven clinical outcomes. William's face flushed slightly as he rifled through the folder, finding copies of exactly those proposals and the corresponding rejection letters bearing his foundation's letterhead and his automatic signature. "I never saw these personally," he said, though the excuse sounded weak even to him. "Of course not," Serena replied without accusation. "Men in your position don't typically review proposals from programs run out of converted warehouses in South Boston. That's what assistant foundations managers are for." She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope, placing it on his desk. "This is a letter from Dr. Elena Martinez at Children's Hospital, Marcus's former physical therapist, before you decided she wasn't making sufficient progress." William's eyes widened slightly. He had indeed changed therapists 6 months ago, frustrated with what he perceived as lack of advancement in Marcus's mobility. Dr. Martinez recommended Dance Beyond specifically for Marcus. She sent the referral to your assistant, suggesting that traditional physical therapy was only addressing his mechanical mobility, not his emotional relationship with movement. Serena opened the envelope and extracted a handwritten note. She wrote, "Marcus has the physical capability to progress much further than current protocols suggest. He needs to learn to trust his body again, and more importantly, to lead his own recovery rather than constantly being directed by adults who see his challenges before they see his potential." William read the letter, his hands trembling slightly. The therapist's observations aligned perfectly with what he had witnessed the previous evening, those few moments when Marcus had led a dance instead of being guided through exercises. "Why didn't you approach me directly?" William asked. "At the club during any of the times you served our table?" Serena smiled, but it carried no warmth. "Mr. Blackwood, in 5 years of working at Beacon Hill, how many personal conversations have you initiated with staff members? How many of us do you know by name beyond what's written on our name tags?" The question was a mirror that reflected truths William wasn't comfortable confronting. In his world, service workers were functional components of his environment, efficient, invisible, and easily replaceable. "But Marcus saw you," he said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Last night he saw something the rest of us missed." "Children see differently," Serena replied. "They haven't learned yet that someone's value is determined by their job title or the neighborhood they can afford to live in. Marcus invited me to dance because he recognized something in me that resonated with something in him." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on an intensity that made William pay attention in a way he hadn't in years. "The question now, Mr. Blackwood, is whether you're ready to see what your son has been trying to show you." William stood and walked to the massive windows overlooking Boston Harbor, his reflection ghost-like against the glass, as he struggled with concepts that challenged everything he thought he understood about his life. "You're saying I've been failing my son," he said, his voice tight with defensive emotion. "I'm saying you've been protecting him from the wrong things," Serena replied, rising from her chair to join him at the window. "You've protected him from judgment, from potential embarrassment, from situations where he might struggle. But you haven't protected him from the most damaging thing of all, the message that he's not capable of leading his own life." From this height, the city looked manageable, controllable. William had built his entire fortune on the principle that problems could be solved through proper application of resources and strategy. But standing next to this woman who had just deconstructed his entire approach to fatherhood, he felt more lost than he had since Elizabeth's death. "The accident," he said suddenly, his voice barely audible. Elizabeth was driving. They were coming back from his dance class, the one thing he truly loved. If I hadn't insisted she pick him up early for a family dinner with investors. Serena turned to study his profile, understanding flooding through her as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about Marcus's physical limitations, it was about William's guilt. "You blame yourself," she said softly, "and you've been trying to keep Marcus safe from a world you think you failed to protect him from once before." William's reflection in the window showed a man who had been carrying unbearable weight for 2 years. The doctors said he'd never dance again. Not really. Not the way he used to. And you believed them. The simple statement cut through years of medical consultations, expert opinions, and carefully managed expectations. They're specialists. They know. They know about muscles and bones and nerve pathways, Serena interrupted. They don't know about spirit. They don't know about a 9-year-old boy who still hears music and feels the need to move to it. William's phone buzzed with an incoming call, but he ignored it. For the first time in months, something mattered more than business. "What are you proposing?" he asked, turning to face her directly. Serena had been preparing for this moment, not just since last night, but for years. Every interaction at the club, every observation of his family dynamics, every carefully crafted proposal that had been rejected had led to this conversation. "I'm proposing that you let me work with Marcus, not as hired help, not as an employee you can control, but as a partner in his recovery. I'm proposing that you fund Dance Beyond not as charity, but as an investment in an approach that sees children as whole human beings rather than collections of limitations to be managed." She moved to his desk and pulled out a thick folder from her purse, clearly something she had brought specifically for this meeting. "This contains documentation of every child who has participated in Dance Beyond over the past 4 years. Progress reports, video documentation, medical assessments from before and after participation. Dr. Martinez isn't the only specialist who has seen results that traditional approaches couldn't achieve." William accepted the folder, its weight substantial in his hands. "But more than that," Serena continued, "I'm proposing that you allow Marcus to lead his own recovery, that you trust him to know what his body can do, what his spirit needs, and what kind of life he wants to build for himself." The phone buzzed again, and this time William's assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Blackwood, you have the board meeting in 10 minutes, and Senator Crawford is holding on line 2. For a moment, William stood frozen between his old world of scheduled obligations and whatever new reality Serena was offering. Then he pressed the intercom button. "Cancel the board meeting. Take messages for Senator Crawford. I'm not available for the rest of the day." The silence that followed was perhaps the most expensive pause in Blackwood Industries' history, and William didn't care. Miss Chen's voice through the intercom carried barely concealed shock. "Sir, the board meeting includes the Henderson acquisition vote. You've been preparing for this for 6 months. William looked at Serena, then at the folder in his hands, then at the photographs of Marcus scattered across his desk. For 2 years, every decision had been filtered through business logic, risk assessment, and strategic advantage. But sitting in that folder was evidence of a different kind of success, measured not in quarterly profits, but in children learning to trust their own bodies again. "Reschedule it for next week," he said firmly. "Send my apologies to the board, but tell them something more important has come up." After he switched off the intercom, Serena studied him with new respect. "That was either very brave or very expensive." "Probably both," William admitted, then surprised himself by smiling for the first time in weeks. "But my son is worth more than the Henderson acquisition." He opened the folder and began examining the contents. Video stills showed children in various stages of mobility, some in wheelchairs, others with braces, some with prosthetics, all engaged in fluid, joyful movement that defied conventional understanding of adaptive therapy. "This boy here," he said, pointing to a photograph of a child who appeared to have a similar condition to Marcus. "How long did it take him to progress to this level?" "Tommy started with us 14 months ago," Serena replied, moving to look over his shoulder. "When he arrived, he hadn't stood unassisted since his spinal injury 2 years earlier. His parents had been told he would need full mechanical support for the rest of his life." The next photo showed the same boy standing independently, arms raised in what was clearly a dance position, his face bright with concentration and joy. "What changed?" William asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We stopped telling him what he couldn't do and started asking him what he wanted to try," Serena explained. "Traditional therapy focuses on restoring function to match predetermined standards. We focus on discovering what new forms of function are possible when children are allowed to explore their own capabilities." William continued turning pages, seeing case study after case study of children who had exceeded medical expectations through what appeared to be simple dance and movement exercises. "The medical community must have objections to your methods," he said. "Some do," Serena acknowledged, "but Dr. Martinez isn't the only specialist who has started referring patients to us. Dr. Sarah Chen at Mass General, Dr. Michael Rodriguez at the Rehabilitation Institute. They've all seen results that traditional approaches couldn't achieve." She pulled out a separate section of the folder containing letters from medical professionals, each one documenting improvements that fell outside normal recovery patterns. "The difference," Serena continued, "is that we don't treat the children as patients. We treat them as artists exploring a new medium. When you tell a child they're learning to walk again, you're reminding them of everything they've lost. When you tell them they're learning a new kind of dance, you're showing them possibilities they never knew existed." William closed the folder and walked back to the window, but this time his reflection looked different, less burdened, more purposeful. "If I agree to this," he said, "if I fund your program and allow Marcus to participate, what guarantee do I have that he won't be hurt, that he won't attempt something beyond his capabilities and injure himself further?" Serena joined him at the window again, her voice gentle but certain. "Mr. Blackwood, the greatest injury you can give a child isn't physical. It's convincing them that they're too fragile for their own dreams. Marcus is already hurt, not in his legs but in his belief that he can control his own life." She pointed toward the harbor, where small sailboats navigated between much larger vessels. "Those little boats don't try to compete with the cargo ships. They find their own wind, their own course. That's what Marcus needs to learn, not how to match what he used to be, but how to discover what he can become." The drive to South Boston took them through neighborhoods that William had never visited, despite living in the city his entire life. As his black Mercedes navigated streets lined with triple-deckers and corner markets, he found himself seeing his city from an entirely different perspective. "Tell me about the warehouse," he said, as they approached the address Serena had provided. "It used to be a textile factory," she explained, gathering the folders that had transformed their morning meeting into something approaching partnership. "The owner, Mrs. Chen, Dr. Chen's mother, actually, let us have it for almost nothing because she believed in what we were trying to do." The building looked nothing like the sleek rehabilitation facilities William was accustomed to. Paint peeled from the brick exterior, and the windows were covered with colorful artwork that was clearly the product of children's creativity rather than professional design. But as they entered through the main door, William's preconceptions began shifting immediately. The space was vast and filled with natural light from industrial skylights. The floors were polished wood, and the walls were covered with photographs, artwork, and what appeared to be personal stories written in children's handwriting. "Welcome to Dance Beyond," Serena said, and her entire demeanor changed. Here she wasn't the careful professional waitress from the club or the measured advocate from his office. Here she was clearly home. A woman in her 60s approached them, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had spent her life in dance. Her hair was silver and pulled back in an elegant bun, and her eyes held the kind of warmth that immediately put people at ease. "William," Serena said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Elena Martinez." William's eyes widened in recognition. "Marcus's former physical therapist." Dr. Martinez smiled and extended her hand. "The one you fired for lack of progress," she said with humor rather than accusation. "I was wondering when you'd finally make it here." "You knew I would come?" "I hoped you would," she replied. "Marcus is a special child with extraordinary potential. I knew that eventually, either his father would find his way to understanding that, or Marcus would find his way here on his own." She gestured toward the main studio space, where a group of children were engaged in what could only be described as controlled chaos. Some moved in wheelchairs, others with crutches or braces, but all were moving with purpose and obvious joy. "Traditional physical therapy treats the body as a machine to be repaired," Dr. Martinez explained as they walked. "We treat it as an instrument to be played. The results speak for themselves." William watched, fascinated, as a girl who appeared to be about Marcus's age led a group of younger children through a sequence of movements that incorporated their various mobility aids as natural extensions of their bodies rather than limitations to be overcome. "That's Sarah," Serena said, following his gaze. "She started with us 8 months ago. Complete spinal cord injury from a diving accident. Her doctors said she'd never have motor function below her waist." The girl spun her wheelchair in a precise pirouette, then gestured for the other children to follow her lead. Her movement was so fluid and confident that it took William a moment to process that what he was watching was technically impossible, according to every medical opinion he'd been given about similar conditions. "How?" he asked simply. "We asked her what she wanted to try instead of telling her what she couldn't do," Dr. Martinez replied. The human spirit is far more resilient and creative than medical textbooks suggest. When children are allowed to explore their own capabilities without predetermined limitations, they often discover possibilities that surprise everyone, including us. A young boy with leg braces similar to Marcus's caught sight of them and approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to adults who saw his abilities rather than his challenges. "Are you here to dance with us?" he asked William directly. William looked to Serena, then to Dr. Martinez, then back to the boy whose question was so simple it cut through all the complex medical and psychological theories they had been discussing. "I'm here to learn," William said, and realized he meant it more than he had meant anything in years. The boy who had approached them introduced himself as Tommy, the same child William had seen in the photographs from Serena's folder. In person, his transformation was even more remarkable. Not just the physical progress, but the way he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told his dreams were impossible. "Tommy, this is Mr. Blackwood," Serena said. "His son Marcus might be joining us soon." Tommy's eyes lit up with the immediate acceptance that children possess before the world teaches them to categorize and judge. "Does Marcus like to dance?" "He used to," William replied, his voice catching slightly on the past tense that had defined so much of how he thought about his son's life. "Cool. What kind of dance?" William realized he didn't know. In all his efforts to manage Marcus's recovery, he had never simply asked his son what he enjoyed, what he missed, what he hoped to rediscover. "I think," William said slowly, "that's something I need to ask him." Dr. Martinez had been observing this interaction with the practiced eye of someone who understood that healing often began with the simplest conversations. "Would you like to see how we work with children who have mobility challenges similar to Marcus's?" She led them to a smaller studio where a group of 5 children, all with various forms of leg braces or support devices, were working with an instructor who was demonstrating how to incorporate their equipment into fluid movement patterns. "The key," Dr. Martinez explained, "is helping them understand that their braces aren't limitations. They're part of their unique movement vocabulary. Each child develops their own style based on their individual capabilities and interests." William watched, mesmerized, as the children transformed what he had always seen as medical devices into integral parts of their artistic expression. One boy used his crutches to create rhythmic patterns against the floor. A girl with braces similar to Marcus's discovered she could create beautiful lines with her legs that children without braces couldn't replicate. "Marcus would fit right in here," Tommy said, appearing beside William with the casual confidence of someone offering friendship. "I bet he has really cool ideas about movement that none of us have thought of yet." The simple statement hit William with unexpected force. For 2 years he had focused on what Marcus had lost, what he couldn't do, what would never be the same. But Tommy was suggesting that Marcus's current condition might offer possibilities rather than just limitations. "How often do the children come here?" William asked. 3 times a week for most," Serena replied. "But really, it's about finding what works for each child. Some need more intensive work, others do better with gradual integration. We follow their lead." "Follow their lead," William repeated, understanding that this phrase represented a fundamental shift from every approach he had tried with Marcus. Dr. Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed him videos of children at various stages of their programs. "This is what we mean by following their lead. Watch how each child discovers their own solutions to movement challenges when they're given space to experiment, rather than being directed toward predetermined outcomes." The videos showed children laughing, concentrating, sometimes struggling, but always engaged in their own learning process rather than passively receiving instruction. "Where do the parents fit into this process?" William asked, realizing that his question revealed his own struggle with letting go of control. "Parents learn alongside their children," Dr. Martinez replied. "Often the biggest breakthrough happens when parents stop trying to guide the recovery and start celebrating the discovery." She gestured toward a viewing area where several adults sat watching the main studio session. "Those parents have learned that their role isn't to push their children toward specific goals, but to witness and support whatever goals their children choose for themselves." William observed the parents, noticing how relaxed and genuinely happy they appeared as they watched their children move with freedom and joy. It was a stark contrast to the anxiety and pressure he had carried to every medical appointment, every therapy session, every interaction related to Marcus's condition. The hardest part for most parents, Serena added gently, is trusting that their children know things about their own bodies and spirits that medical experts might miss. As if summoned by their conversation, a woman approached from the viewing area, clearly one of the parents Dr. Martinez had indicated. She was about William's age, professionally dressed with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested she was accustomed to solving problems through determination and resources. "Excuse me," she said, addressing William directly. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you considering the program for your child?" "I'm exploring options," William replied carefully. The woman smiled with the recognition of someone who had walked the same path. "I'm Jennifer Walsh. My daughter Katie has been in the program for 6 months. Before that, we had tried every traditional therapy approach available. Katie was making progress, but she was also becoming increasingly resistant to treatment. The sessions had become battles." She pointed toward the main studio where a girl with forearm crutches was leading a group exercise with obvious joy and confidence. "That's Katie now. She's not just moving better, she's moving with purpose, with happiness." The technical progress followed naturally once she rediscovered her love for movement itself. William studied the girl Jennifer had pointed out, seeing not just physical improvement, but an intangible quality that had been missing from every therapy session he had attended with Marcus: genuine enthusiasm. "What convinced you to try this approach?" he asked. Jennifer's expression grew serious. "My daughter looked at me one day after a particularly difficult physical therapy session and asked, 'Mom, why do all my exercises feel like punishment?' That's when I knew we needed to find something different." The question resonated with painful accuracy. William realized that Marcus had stopped asking questions about his therapy months ago, had stopped expressing preferences or hopes, had simply accepted whatever treatment adults deemed necessary. "Children know more about healing than we give them credit for," Jennifer continued. "Our job is to provide them with safe spaces to explore that knowledge, not to override it with our fears." As if to illustrate her point, Katie noticed their conversation and approached with the easy confidence of a child who was accustomed to adults who listened to her rather than just directing her. "Are you thinking about bringing your kid here?" she asked William with directness that was both refreshing and slightly intimidating. "Yes," William replied, and realized as he said it that the decision had already been made somewhere during the past hour of observation. "Cool," Katie said simply. "What's their name?" "Marcus." "Well, tell Marcus that Katie said this place is awesome and that we have the best snacks." She grinned and returned to the studio, leaving William with the strangest sensation that he had just received a professional recommendation from the most qualified source possible, a child who had walked the path his son was still navigating. The drive back to Beacon Hill passed in contemplative silence, both William and Serena processing what they had witnessed at Dance Beyond. But as they approached the familiar streets of William's neighborhood, the weight of practical reality began to settle over the inspiration they had found in the warehouse studio. "There's something I need to tell you," William said as they pulled into the circular driveway of his brownstone mansion. "Marcus doesn't know about today, about any of this. I never told him about your program or what you do." Serena turned to study his profile, understanding the implications immediately. "You've been making decisions about his life without including him in the conversation." "I've been trying to protect him from disappointment," William replied. But even as he said it, the excuse sounded hollow after what they had witnessed that afternoon. "Or protect yourself from his disappointment in you," Serena observed, with the gentle directness that had characterized all their interactions. William's hands tightened on the steering wheel, even though the car was parked. "After Elizabeth died after the accident, Marcus withdrew from everyone, including me. I thought if I could find the right treatment, the right specialists, the right approach, I could give him back the life he lost." "But you never asked him what kind of life he wanted to build going forward." The statement wasn't a question, and William's silence confirmed its accuracy. For 2 years, he had been trying to restore a past version of his son rather than discovering who Marcus was becoming. As they sat in the driveway, movement in the front window caught their attention. Marcus appeared, still wearing his school uniform, looking out with the expression of someone who had learned to expect very little from adults who claimed to have his best interests at heart. "He's been waiting for you," Serena observed, noting the way Marcus's face had brightened slightly upon seeing his father's car. "He waits every day," William admitted. And every day I come home with updates about appointments, schedules, new treatments to try. I never come home just to see him. The weight of this realization hung between them as Marcus continued watching from the window, clearly debating whether to come outside or wait for his father to come in. "Mr. Blackwood," Serena said, her voice taking on the tone she used when working with parents at Dance Beyond. "What do you think would happen if you walked in there and instead of talking about medical appointments or therapy schedules, you simply asked Marcus what he did today that made him happy?" William considered this, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he had asked his son about happiness rather than progress, goals rather than limitations, dreams rather than realistic expectations. "What if he says nothing made him happy?" William asked, voicing the fear that had been underlying all his careful management of Marcus's life. "Then you'll know where you really stand," Serena replied. "And you can start working together to change that." Marcus had disappeared from the window, and a moment later the front door opened. He approached the car with careful steps, his braces clicking softly against the brick walkway. His expression was curious rather than concerned. Clearly, his father sitting in the driveway talking to someone was unusual enough to warrant investigation. William got out of the car and met his son halfway across the driveway. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet someone special. This is Miss Serena Baptiste." Marcus's eyes widened in recognition. "From the club. You danced with me." "I did," Serena replied, stepping out of the car with a warm smile. "And you're an excellent dance partner." "Dad said I wasn't supposed to bother the staff," Marcus said, glancing between them with the careful navigation of a child who had learned to read adult tensions. William felt the statement like a physical blow. In his effort to teach Marcus appropriate social boundaries, he had taught him that his natural impulses toward connection were inappropriate. "Marcus," William said, kneeling down to meet his son at eye level, "you weren't bothering anyone, and I was wrong to suggest that you were." The admission hung in the air between them, marking perhaps the first time William had acknowledged a mistake in his parenting approach since Elizabeth's death. "Miss Serena runs a special dance program," William continued, glancing up at her for confirmation before proceeding, "for children who want to explore new ways of moving and dancing. Would you be interested in learning more about it?" Marcus's entire demeanor shifted, his careful composure giving way to something approaching excitement. "Really? Even with my braces?" "Especially with your braces," Serena said, crouching down to join the conversation at Marcus's level. "We've learned that children with braces often discover the most creative and beautiful ways of moving. Your braces aren't something to work around. They're part of what makes your dancing unique." William watched his son's face transform as Serena spoke, seeing an expression he hadn't witnessed in months, hope combined with genuine interest. "When could I try it?" Marcus asked, then immediately looked to his father for permission, a habitual check that reminded William how much control he had been exercising over every aspect of his son's life. "That depends," William said, "on whether you want to try it. This is your choice, Marcus, not mine." The concept of choice in relation to his own activities was clearly novel for Marcus, who had grown accustomed to adults making decisions based on medical necessity rather than personal preference. "I want to try," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I really, really want to try." For the first time in 2 years, William saw his son not as a patient to be managed or a problem to be solved, but as a person with his own desires, his own agency, his own wisdom about what he needed to heal. That evening, over dinner at their dining room table that had been formally set for 2 every night since Elizabeth's death, Marcus talked more than he had in months. The conversation flowed with an energy that reminded William of family dinners from before their world had changed so dramatically. "Tell me about the other kids in the program," Marcus said, his fork pausing over his meal as he focused entirely on Serena's descriptions of Dance Beyond. "Well, there's Tommy, who's about your age. He has braces similar to yours, and he's developed this amazing way of incorporating them into rhythmic patterns. And Sarah, who uses a wheelchair and has become one of our best instructors, because she sees movement possibilities that people who walk might never notice." Marcus absorbed every detail with the intense concentration of someone discovering that he wasn't alone in his experiences. "Do they ever feel embarrassed about being different?" The question cut to the heart of what William realized had been his son's central struggle. Not the physical limitations, but the social isolation that came from being seen as different in a world that prioritized conformity. At first, some of them do, Serena replied honestly, but one of the beautiful things about the program is that everyone is different in their own way. Nobody has to pretend to be something they're not, and nobody has to hide the things that make them unique. William found himself hanging on every word, realizing that these were conversations he should have been having with his son for 2 years, but had avoided out of his own discomfort with addressing Marcus's feelings about his condition. "Dad?" Marcus said suddenly, turning to face his father directly. "Why didn't you tell me about Miss Serena's program before?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity rather than accusation, but it still hit William with the force of recognition that his protective instincts had inadvertently become barriers to his son's growth. "Because I was scared," William admitted, the honesty surprising them both. "I was scared that if you tried something new and it didn't work out the way we hoped, you'd be disappointed. And I was scared that I wouldn't know how to help you if things didn't go perfectly." Marcus considered this with the seriousness of someone much older than 9. "But Dad, I'm already disappointed. About lots of things. Hiding from that doesn't make it go away." The observation was so mature and accurate that William felt simultaneously proud of his son's emotional intelligence and ashamed of his own avoidance of difficult conversations. "You're absolutely right," William said, "and from now on we're going to make decisions together about your activities, your therapy, everything that affects your life. You get to have opinions and choices about your own future." Serena watched this exchange with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed breakthrough moments countless times, but never grew tired of seeing families reconnect with each other. "There's something else," she said, reaching into her purse to pull out a folder that was different from the one she had shown William earlier. "Marcus, your former physical therapist, Dr. Martinez, works with our program. She's been hoping to see you again." Marcus's eyes widened. "Dr. Martinez, I liked her. She always listened to what I said about how things felt. Why did we stop seeing her?" Marcus asked his father, and William realized that this was another decision he had made without involving his son in the reasoning. "Because I thought she wasn't helping you progress fast enough," William admitted. "But I think I was measuring the wrong kind of progress." "What do you mean?" William looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not a collection of symptoms and limitations but a complete person who had been patiently waiting for the adults in his life to see him clearly. "I was so focused on trying to get your body back to where it was before the accident that I stopped paying attention to who you were becoming after it," William said. "Dr. Martinez understood something I missed, that healing isn't about going backward. It's about moving forward in whatever way works for you." Marcus nodded with the understanding of someone who had been waiting for this recognition for a very long time. "So, when do I get to start?" William looked to Serena, who smiled and pulled out a schedule from the folder. "How about this Saturday? That gives us a few days to prepare, and weekends tend to be less overwhelming for new participants." "This Saturday," Marcus repeated, as if testing how the words felt. 4 days from now." For the first time since the accident, William saw his son looking forward to something rather than simply enduring it. And for the first time since Elizabeth's death, William felt like he was moving toward answers, rather than just managing problems. The transformation had begun not with medical intervention or expensive equipment, but with the simple acknowledgement that Marcus had his own wisdom about what he needed to heal. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made Boston look like a postcard. Marcus had been awake since dawn, not from anxiety but from anticipation, an emotion that had been largely absent from his life for the past 2 years. "Are you nervous?" William asked as they drove towards South Boston, the same route he had taken with Serena just days earlier. "A little," Marcus admitted, looking out the window as they passed through neighborhoods that were becoming familiar. "But it's good nervous, like when you're about to do something important." William glanced at his son in the rearview mirror, noting how different he looked when he was anticipating something he wanted to do rather than something he was obligated to endure. When they arrived at the warehouse, Marcus's excitement was immediately evident. He moved more quickly than usual toward the entrance, his braces clicking with eager rhythm rather than reluctant compliance. "There he is," Tommy called out as they entered the main studio, and Marcus's face lit up with the recognition that he was expected and welcomed. Dr. Martinez appeared almost immediately, her warm smile directed equally at Marcus and William. "Marcus, I've been hoping to see you again. Are you ready to discover some new ways to move?" "Yes," Marcus replied with certainty that surprised even him. What followed was unlike any therapy session William had ever observed. Instead of being directed through prescribed exercises, Marcus was invited to explore the studio space, to meet other children, to watch ongoing activities and join whatever interested him. Within minutes, he had gravitated toward a group working with rhythmic movement, his natural musical instincts drawing him to the patterns they were creating. Without any formal instruction, he began experimenting with how his braces could contribute to the rhythmic sounds. "He's a natural," Serena observed, appearing beside William in the observation area. "Look how quickly he's finding his own way to participate." William watched amazed as Marcus integrated himself into the group activity, not by hiding his differences, but by discovering how those differences could be assets. His braces created metallic percussion that other children couldn't replicate, and his careful, deliberate movements provided a steadying influence that helped the group maintain their rhythm. "In traditional therapy," Dr. Martinez explained, joining their conversation, "we would have spent weeks preparing Marcus for this kind of group interaction. Here he's doing it naturally because he's following his own interests rather than our predetermined goals." After an hour of various activities, Marcus approached his father with flushed cheeks and bright eyes. "Dad, can I show you something?" "Of course." Marcus led him to the center of the studio space, where he had apparently been working on a simple movement sequence with Tommy and another boy. "We figured out how to make our braces work together," he explained, positioning himself alongside his new friends. What followed was a brief but beautifully coordinated demonstration of 3 children who had transformed their mobility aids into instruments of artistic expression. Each boy's braces created different sounds and allowed for different movement patterns, and together they had created something that none of them could have achieved individually. "It's like we're a percussion section," Marcus explained, his voice filled with pride in their collaborative discovery. William found himself blinking back tears as he watched his son experience something that had been missing from his life for too long: the joy of creative collaboration with peers who understood his challenges not as limitations, but as unique contributions to their shared expression. "This is what healing looks like," Serena said softly, watching as the 3 boys continued their impromptu performance for the small audience of parents and instructors who had gathered to appreciate their innovation. For the first time since the accident, William felt hope not just for Marcus's physical recovery, but for his son's future as a complete, creative, confident person who happened to move through the world differently than others. The transformation wasn't just in Marcus, it was in William's understanding of what success could look like when measured by joy rather than conformity to predetermined standards. 3 weeks after Marcus began attending Dance Beyond, William found himself in a very different kind of meeting than he was accustomed to. Instead of the corporate boardrooms where he typically conducted business, he sat in the warehouse studio's small office space, surrounded by the sounds of children discovering their own capabilities in the adjacent practice area. "The expansion proposal is ambitious," he said, reviewing the detailed plans Serena and Dr. Martinez had prepared. "But after seeing the results firsthand, I think it's also necessary." The proposal outlined a comprehensive expansion of Dance Beyond that would transform it from a small community program into a recognized rehabilitation facility that could serve hundreds of children annually while maintaining its innovative child-led approach. The funding would allow us to hire additional specialists, acquire proper equipment, and most importantly, provide scholarships for families who can't afford traditional therapy options, Dr. Martinez explained. William had already made his decision, but he appreciated their thoroughness in presenting every aspect of how the funding would be used. It represented a dramatic departure from his usual investment philosophy. This was funding for impact rather than return, for transformation rather than profit. "I want to propose something beyond just funding," William said, pulling out his own folder of documents. "The Blackwood Foundation is prepared to provide 5 years of comprehensive support, but I also want to offer something else." He placed architectural drawings on the small table between them. "A permanent facility, purpose-built for your methodology, designed with input from the children and families who will use it. Serena and Dr. Martinez exchanged glances of surprise that quickly transformed into excitement as they began examining the plans. The design incorporates everything we've learned about how children with mobility differences interact with space, William continued. Adaptive features that enhance rather than accommodate, performance spaces that celebrate rather than hide differences, and family areas that encourage parents to participate in rather than just observe their children's growth. The plans showed a building that looked more like a community arts center than a medical facility, with large windows, flexible spaces, and design elements that prioritized joy and creativity over clinical efficiency. "There's something else," William said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. Marcus asked if he could be involved in the design process. He has ideas about what kids like him would want in a space designed for them. Dr. Martinez smiled with the satisfaction of someone seeing years of advocacy work finally receiving the recognition and resources it deserved. Including the children in designing their own healing space. That's exactly the kind of approach that will make this facility truly revolutionary. "The location," Serena said, studying the architectural plans more carefully. "Where would this be built?" William's expression grew slightly sheepish. "That's the part you might find interesting. I've been working with the city planning department to identify appropriate sites, and there's a parcel of land in Back Bay that would be perfect. Close to major medical facilities, accessible by public transportation, in a neighborhood that sends a message about the value we place on this work." "Back Bay," Serena repeated, understanding the significance immediately. "That's not exactly where community programs usually get built." "Exactly," William replied. "I want this facility to be in a location that forces the entire city to recognize that children with disabilities deserve the same quality of resources and environment as anyone else. No more hidden warehouses or marginal locations." The implications were significant beyond just the practical benefits. A world-class adaptive dance and movement facility in one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods would make a statement about value, worth, and societal priorities that extended far beyond the children it would directly serve. "When Marcus found out about the location," William continued, "he said something that convinced me we were making the right choice. He said, 'Now other kids won't have to hide what makes them special.'" Dr. Martinez reached across the table to examine the timeline outlined in William's proposal. "According to this, construction could begin within 6 months and be completed within 18 months. The goal is to have the facility operational by the time Marcus starts middle school," William confirmed. "He's been part of planning this timeline, and he has very strong opinions about being involved in the ribbon-cutting ceremony." Serena laughed, imagining Marcus's excitement about being part of such a momentous occasion. "I think we can accommodate that request." As they continued reviewing the plans, the sounds from the main studio reminded them of why this expansion mattered so much. Children's voices mixed with music, laughter punctuated by the rhythmic sounds of movement, and underneath it all, the unmistakable energy of young people discovering their own strength and creativity. "There's one more element to discuss," William said, pulling out a final set of documents. "Staffing and leadership structure for the new facility." He looked directly at Serena as he continued. "I want to offer you the position of executive director, with full autonomy over programming, methodology, and day-to-day operations. Dr. Martinez would serve as medical director, and together you would build a team that maintains the philosophy that's made this program so successful." The offer represented not just professional advancement, but recognition and validation of the work Serena had been doing in relative obscurity for years. "You'd be leaving the club?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. "I'd be leaving behind the need to be invisible," William replied. "It's time for the world to see exactly what you're capable of when you're allowed to lead rather than serve." 6 months later, the contrast between Serena's old life and her new reality was striking in ways that went far beyond professional advancement. She stood in the main studio of the nearly completed Dance Beyond Center, watching construction workers install specialized flooring designed specifically for children with mobility aids, while simultaneously reviewing applications from families across New England who wanted their children to participate in the program. The facility was everything the architectural plans had promised and more. Natural light flooded through carefully designed windows. The acoustics enhanced every sound from whispered conversations to full group activities, and every element had been designed with input from the children who would use the space. "Miss Serena," Marcus called out as he entered the studio, moving with the confident stride of someone who had learned to see his braces as tools rather than obstacles. "Wait until you see what Tommy and I figured out for the performance space." Over the months of program participation, Marcus had transformed not just physically, though his improvements in strength, balance, and coordination were remarkable, but in ways that were harder to measure, but more important. He approached challenges with curiosity rather than fear, collaborated with other children as an equal, rather than someone who needed special accommodation, and spoke about his future with excitement rather than resignation. "Show me," Serena said, following him toward the performance area where several other children had gathered to demonstrate their latest innovations. What she witnessed was a perfect example of why the child-led approach worked so well. The children had developed a collaborative piece that incorporated wheelchairs, crutches, braces, and prosthetics, not as adaptive accommodations, but as integral instruments in a complex, beautiful composition that could only exist because of their diverse ways of moving. "We're calling it Symphony of Difference," explained Sarah, the girl in the wheelchair who had become an unofficial leader among the older children. "Each of us contributes sounds and movements that the others can't make, so the whole thing only works when we're all participating." Dr. Martinez, who had been observing from the side, approached with the pleased expression of someone watching theory become successful practice. "They developed this entirely on their own," she told Serena. "No adult instruction, no predetermined goals. They simply explored what was possible when they combined their individual capabilities." The performance was scheduled to be part of the facility's official opening ceremony, which had evolved from a simple ribbon cutting into a major community event that would showcase not just the building, but the philosophy behind it. "How many applications have we received for the fall program?" Dr. Martinez asked, as they watched the children continue refining their collaborative piece. "Over 300, Serena replied, still amazed by the response. "From families in 6 different states. We're going to have to develop a waiting list and additional programming to meet the demand." The success had exceeded even William's optimistic projections. Media coverage of the program had generated national attention, and medical professionals from other cities were requesting training in their methodology. "And the medical community's response?" Doctor Martinez asked, though she already knew the answer from the stack of referrals that arrived daily. "Dr. Chen at Mass General is sending us 12 children just from her practice. Dr. Rodriguez wants to establish a satellite program at the Rehabilitation Institute. Even some of the specialists who were initially skeptical are asking to observe our sessions." The vindication was sweet, but more important was the practical impact. Children who had been told they would never regain certain capabilities were exceeding every medical prediction, not through revolutionary treatment, but through revolutionary expectations. William appeared in the studio entrance, carrying what appeared to be a newspaper, and wearing the expression of someone with significant news to share. "The Boston Globe feature is out," he announced, holding up the front page of the Sunday edition. The headline read, "Revolutionary Approach Transforms Pediatric Rehabilitation. Boston Facility Proves Children Know How to Heal." The article included photos of children from the program, quotes from medical professionals who had observed their methodology, and a detailed explanation of how Dance Beyond was challenging fundamental assumptions about disability, capability, and healing. "There's something else," William continued, his voice taking on the tone he used when delivering particularly important information. "The article has generated inquiries from 3 other cities about establishing similar programs, and the Department of Health and Human Services wants to discuss incorporating our methodology into national rehabilitation guidelines." The implications were staggering. What had begun as a small community program run out of a converted warehouse was positioned to influence how the entire medical system approached pediatric rehabilitation. "Marcus has a quote in the article," William added, his pride evident as he read, "At Dance Beyond, nobody tries to make you normal. They help you discover how to be the best version of yourself. That's way better than normal." Serena felt the full weight of how far they had all traveled from that evening at the Beacon Hill Club, when Marcus had simply wanted to dance and she had chosen to accept his invitation. That single moment of connection, had led to institutional change that would impact thousands of children. "The opening ceremony is in 2 weeks," she said, looking around the nearly completed facility that represented so much more than just a building. "Are we ready?" "We've been ready for years," Dr. Martinez replied. "We just finally have a space that matches our vision." As if to prove her point, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the studio, the universal language of joy that had been the foundation of their work from the very beginning. 1 year after the Dance Beyond Center's grand opening, the facility hummed, with the kind of productive energy that comes from work aligned with purpose. Children from across New England participated in programs that had evolved far beyond anything originally envisioned, and the methodology had been adopted by facilities in 12 cities nationwide. Marcus, now 10 years old, and in his second year with the program, had developed into one of the peer mentors for newer participants. His role involved welcoming children who were just beginning their journey and helping them understand that their differences could be sources of strength rather than limitations. "This is Kevin," Marcus said, introducing a 7-year-old boy with leg braces to Tommy and Sarah. "He just started yesterday, and he's worried that he won't be able to keep up with everyone else." The ease with which Marcus handled these introductions reflected not just his own growth, but the culture that had developed within the program, one where children supported each other's discoveries rather than competing to meet external standards. "I felt the same way when I started," Tommy assured Kevin. "But watch this." He launched into a brief demonstration of how his braces had become integral to his personal movement style, creating rhythmic patterns that were uniquely his own. From her office overlooking the main studio, Serena watched these interactions with the satisfaction of someone seeing vision become reality. The past year had brought challenges, managing rapid growth, training new staff, balancing demand with quality, but every day reinforced that they were creating something genuinely transformative. "The Harvard Medical School delegation is here for their observation visit," Dr. Martinez announced, entering the office with a group of distinguished-looking adults who were clearly academics rather than practitioners. These visits had become routine as medical schools across the country sought to understand and potentially integrate Dance Beyond's methodology into their training programs. What made this visit particularly significant was that it represented formal recognition from one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the world. "Dr. Elizabeth Chen will be leading the observation," Dr. Martinez continued, introducing a woman whose research on pediatric rehabilitation had influenced policy at the national level. "She's particularly interested in how our outcomes compare to traditional approaches." The delegation spent 3 hours observing sessions, interviewing staff, and most importantly, talking directly with children about their experiences. What they witnessed challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between medical intervention and healing. "The children's self-advocacy skills are remarkable," Dr. Chen observed, as they watched Marcus explain to a new participant how to experiment with movement rather than trying to achieve specific positions. "They're not just recovering from their conditions, they're developing leadership abilities that will serve them throughout their lives." Later that afternoon, William arrived for what had become his weekly visit to observe Marcus's sessions. The transformation in their relationship over the past year had been as significant as any physical progress Marcus had made. "How was school today?" William asked as they walked through the facility together. "Good," Marcus replied, then launched into detailed description of a presentation he had given to his class about adaptive dance. "Some of the kids want to visit here to see what we do. I told them they could come to our next performance." The performances had evolved into monthly celebrations, where children showcased their individual and collaborative work for families and community members. They had become some of the most anticipated cultural events in the city, drawing audiences who came not out of curiosity about disability, but appreciation for innovative artistry. "There's something I want to show you," Marcus said, leading his father toward a wall that had been designated for personal stories and artwork from program participants. A new addition caught William's attention immediately, a photograph of Marcus teaching movement techniques to a group of children at his school, accompanied by a written reflection that read, "I used to think my braces made me different in a bad way. Now I know they make me different in a way that helps other people. That's the best kind of different to be." As William read his son's words, He reflected on his own journey from a father trying to hide his child's differences to someone who celebrated them as unique contributions to the world. The transformation had required him to question assumptions about normalcy, success, and the meaning of a life well lived. "Dad," Marcus said, interrupting his father's contemplation, "Miss Serena wants to talk to you about something important." They found Serena in the main studio, where she was reviewing plans for what appeared to be another expansion project. When she looked up, her expression carried the excitement of someone with significant news to share. "The Department of Education has approved our proposal," she announced without preamble. "Dance Beyond methodology will be integrated into special education curricula in public schools across Massachusetts, starting next fall." The implications were staggering. What had begun with one boy's invitation to dance had evolved into systemic change that would impact how thousands of children with disabilities experienced education and self-discovery. "Which means," Serena continued, "that children like Marcus won't have to choose between attending regular school and accessing innovative approaches to their development. The approaches will be available in their regular schools." William felt the full circle of transformation that had begun with his protective instincts and evolved into advocacy for systemic change. "How many schools will be involved initially?" 50 pilot schools in the first year, with the goal of statewide implementation within 3 years, Serena replied. "And other states are watching our results with interest in developing their own programs." Marcus listened to this conversation with the kind of engaged attention that suggested he understood he wasn't just a beneficiary of these changes, but a catalyst for them. His willingness to be vulnerable, to ask for what he needed, to lead rather than follow, had contributed to transformations that extended far beyond his individual healing. "There's going to be a ceremony at the State House next month," Serena added. "The governor wants to recognize Dance Beyond as a model program for innovative special education. Marcus has been invited to speak." "Me?" Marcus asked, his surprise evident. "What would I say?" "Whatever you think other kids like you need to hear," William suggested, understanding that his son's authentic voice carried more authority on this subject than any adult expert. As they discussed the upcoming ceremony and its implications, the sounds of the late afternoon session filled the studio around them. Children working individually and in groups, discovering their capabilities, supporting each other's growth and creating art that could only exist because of their unique ways of moving through the world. Dr. Martinez joined their conversation, carrying a folder that had become familiar over the past year, outcome data that documented the measurable success of their approach. "The 18-month follow-up studies are complete," she announced. "Children who participated in Dance Beyond showed improvements in motor function, self-confidence, social integration, and academic performance that exceed traditional rehabilitation approaches by every metric we measured. But more importantly," she continued, "they show improvements in life satisfaction and future aspirations that you can't measure with standardized tests, but that determine everything about how they'll navigate the world as they grow up." These outcomes had attracted attention from medical professionals worldwide, but for the people in this room, the statistics merely confirmed what they witnessed daily: children thriving when they were allowed to lead their own healing. "The real measure of success," Marcus said with the wisdom of someone who had lived the transformation they were discussing, "isn't how normal we become. It's how much we can help other people understand that normal isn't the goal. Being yourself is the goal." His statement captured the essence of everything Dance Beyond had achieved and everything it represented for the future. Not adaptation to existing standards, but expansion of what standards could include. As evening approached and families began arriving to pick up their children, the facility filled with the kind of energy that comes from meaningful work done in community with others who share the same values and vision. William watched Marcus demonstrate a movement sequence to a younger child, noted how naturally he had assumed the role of teacher and mentor, and realized that his son's future was no longer defined by limitations overcome, but by contributions yet to be made. "Thank you," he said to Serena as they watched the children's interactions. "For what specifically?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "For accepting his invitation to dance," William replied. "For seeing him as a complete person when I was still seeing him as a problem to be solved. For teaching both of us that healing isn't about returning to who we used to be. It's about discovering who we're meant to become. The simple acknowledgement carried the weight of everything that had changed since that evening at the Beacon Hill Club, when a 9-year-old boy had extended his hand and a woman had chosen to accept his invitation despite the social risks involved. That moment of connection had grown into a movement that was transforming how society understood disability, capability, and the fundamental human right to define one's own potential. As they prepared to leave for the evening, Marcus approached with the announcement that had become his daily ritual. "Same time tomorrow?" "Same time tomorrow," Serena confirmed, understanding that the question wasn't really about scheduling but about the assurance that this place, this community of acceptance and possibility, would continue to exist for him and for all the children who still needed to discover their own ways of moving through the world with dignity and joy. In a world where powerful people rarely change their perspectives, and where those without power often remain invisible, the story of William, Serena, and Marcus serves as a reminder that the most profound transformations begin when someone has the courage to extend an invitation, and someone else has the wisdom to accept it. The revolution that started with a dance continues in every child who learns that their differences are not obstacles to overcome, but gifts to share with a world that needs exactly what they have to offer.